Fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host and astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you so much for being here. And we have back with us the one and only, one of my very dear friends, one of my very best friends, actually, that you have met before on Synchronicity Web TV. And that is the great, my friend, the beautiful Michael Barwick. Michael, welcome.
Always a pleasure, Nadiya, to sit down and have a conversation with you, of course.
Of course, and you know how much, I mean, look, we have that part of us that turns on the camera and has the conversation, but also turns off the camera and has the conversation. But somewhere in between, people get the gist of the chemistry and the energy and why it is that we love each other so much.
Indeed. Indeed, yes. Well, we've hung out for so long together. And I mean, how many breakfasts did we spend hours poring over charts and discussing the finer points of astrological lore, you know, in the wee hours. It's you know, some of my favorite memories of Toronto are those kinds of experiences where you have those kinds of conversations. So, you know, we miss you here. We miss, and of course we miss so much with the pandemic going on.
Yeah, well, look, that was just the beginning, right? The astrology stuff, just a little taste of it. But now
yes,
you've been doing so much and you've been so busy. But of course, I just think that you really are one of the best astrologers out there right now, one of the best astrologers that I've ever come across. And that's why I love sharing you with my audience and with Synchronicity University in particular, you know that.
yes,
And so Synchronicity University is going to feature a brand new 5-part course with you on traditional techniques for the 21st century astrologer. So here's the thing, people have been asking me to teach traditional techniques for years, and I know the techniques, but the thing is that I consider myself very much a modern astrologer, a mystical astrologer. I am a modern woman in a modern world for modern times. And so when I thought about who would be the best person to teach traditional techniques, it really was you at the very top of the list. And so you're going to be teaching right now as we're recording this. It is late March, and through the end of April, people will get to choose their tuition rate as low as just $5 a class, which is unheard of for a class on traditional.
So exciting.
Techniques. It is, isn't it? Like, to have it accessible to so many people, I think is very exciting.
Yeah.
So let's start with talk about the course. What is the course about? And then we're going to actually give people a preview so they'll start getting their hands on what traditional techniques is really about. But start with, what is the course about?
The course basically is the course I would have loved to have been able to take when I started learning about traditional techniques. Because why? You'll learn sort of the traditional techniques in terms of how, specifically around planetary strength and what contributes to it. You'll learn about classic temperament theory and compare it to how we sum up charts through the elements and qualities. We'll talk about the lots and the, you know, the Arabic parts, emphasizing the part of fortune and the part of spirit. So it provides sort of a grounding in some specific points and also a more general approach to understanding the whole chart from a traditional perspective.
Yeah, and it sounds like it really is breaking it down, like what you mean when you say essential dignities, what you mean when you say, yeah, like to really explain it so that no matter what level you're at, you'll be able to grasp it and apply it.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of words that once you have a grasp of what it's about, you already have concepts that are related to it. Like, for example, almost every beginning student understands, as soon as you understand that a sign is ruled by a planet, you understand a essential dignity. You understand domicile rulership or home rulership, where a planet feels like it's at home, like Saturn in Aquarius.
Yeah, it's able to bring forward some of its better qualities more easily, just like you do when you're at home. Yeah.
Right, exactly. The domicile rulership is how it's referred to classically. Well, one way of referring to it classically. There are a number of ways of referring to these things because there's been so much time to refer to them, including in different languages and going back and forth from different different contexts through history. So what I try to do, or will try to do, hope to accomplish, is to be able to boil it down to sort of its essence and show you how you can apply it to a
Your
modern
chart.
chart,
Yeah.
your chart,
Yeah.
and see the relationships of the traditional techniques and how it impacts you, and also, you know, have some tools to sort of come to terms with so-called, you know, bad things in a chart as opposed to good things in a chart. You know,
And we try not
the
to think
value
of that.
judgments.
In modern astrology, we try not to think in terms of good and bad. It's all about how you use it, right? But yeah,
Yes, yes.
there are traditional ways of understanding as well how to take what otherwise might not be as strong and channel that energy so that it is able
Well,
to.
yeah, I mean, what is it like? What does it mean to, you know, I pointed this out at one of my previous lectures recently, that it's possible to have a really great car and drive it into a wall,
Mhm.
right? It's that there's nothing in astrology that's so great that it can't be wrecked by human ingenuity, like it's or perversity. There's nothing that good, and there's nothing so bad that you can't find something to do with it, you know, some kind of purpose for it that is productive. It doesn't have to be tragic. Like, I think it's also important to recognize that, you know, I mean, this is a term that may get me into trouble, but sometimes I find traditional astrology is some dead guy astrology, because that's what it is. And these dead guys were guys, and these books were written when astrology was part of the status quo. So you find references to things in these texts that they're concerned about, that are very conservative.
Yeah,
Uh,
and concerned about at the time too, and that like in their being conservative, they're essentially asserting a worldview is what they're doing. Yeah, and a philosophical assertion is what they're doing, and that philosophical assertion wasn't necessarily one that was defined as accessible or welcoming, right, to all people. Yeah.
no, it was still, you know, I mean, the, there exists in the culture its context, which is cannot be extracted from that astrology is somehow pure, so this pure objective thing that is can we strip from its cultural context. You know, I think that Jeffrey Cornelius's idea of the take in terms of on an astrological symbol, in terms of understanding from a natal perspective that it must be consistent with astrological symbolism in terms of what an interpretation looks like. It must match the biography of the native, the story, the life story of the person who's come to see you in terms of that interpretation.
I
Then
love Jeffrey. Let me just give Jeffrey a shout out because he's my former professor and I love him so much. And I know he loves your work so much as well that you have
yes,
chances to interact with him. So we send Jeffrey
yes,
lots and lots of love
yes,
for his brilliance and his contribution to astrology.
very generous man, very generous in terms of
And
his
brilliant. Absolutely.
brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So then there's to this is added, you know, you have the symbolism, you have the life story of the native, then you have the context, the astrology, the context in which it's happening, the society in which it's happening, and what makes sense within that context. For example, you wouldn't necessarily, in a modern context, describe somebody's slaves by looking at their sixth house and the indicators around it, right? Which is a traditional delineation of the sixth house as the house of slavery. You know, slaves aren't, you know, so in these days, right? The world's change has moved forward from this
Thank
perspective.
goodness. Yes, yes.
Thank goodness. So I think there's a context, and then as you pointed out, you know, what makes it that realized piece is the creative imagination that somehow reaches into this strange ocean of possibilities and pulls something wondrous and strange and phenomenal and gives it to the client. I mean, it's magical.
That is what it means to think astrologically, to speak astrologically. And I think what happens with beginner students in particular is they get bogged down into formulas, like Venus in Aries equals this, like it's some kind of a formula, instead of being willing to explore the symbol, see what it could mean, all the ways in which that could come forward and be realized for a person. Yes, of course, from a traditional perspective, Venus in Aries, not the best placement for Venus to be in. She doesn't necessarily like being in that sign so much. However, there are absolutely ways to tap into that energy and to consider it, and also to consider it in context. What is she?
Well, is it?
Yeah.
Is it really that Venus has a problem in Aries, or is it that the world has a problem with ardent, passionate women? Is that the real problem?
Wow, I love that. I love that. Yeah, isn't it? Maybe that is at the foundation of some of these assertions. Very powerful.
Well, the cultural milieu has a problem with women having that kind of ardent, passionate nature. It's not supported by the culture, right? It's considered kind of, you know, it's not supported in the status quo. And so that interpretation is you know, an interpretation that relates to the status quo conservative way of doing things. Someone who has Venus in Aries or any of these kinds of placements has to find a countercultural way to work with the energies involved, something that is not necessarily mainstream, outside of the usual box thinking, to find solutions for what to do with these things. This isn't to say that they wouldn't, some of the Venus in Aries might not have certain challenges because of Venus is in Aries, but it is to say that I think that this measuring, what are we really measuring? When we talk about a planet being dignified, just the word dignified, just what that suggests, what does that really mean? That means, I think, my view is that essential dignity tells us something about the social acceptability of the principle. And so therefore, it plays well with others. Planets that are in so-called bad positions are more, you know, so-called, are you know, are more likely to have to find alternative ways of working with the energy outside of the conventionality of the mainstream view. But the great thing about the time in which we live is that there are opportunities to be able to live things out on many different levels in a way that I don't think was really possible in previous epochs.
Absolutely. And just what it means to be human, our ability to exercise our agency. And when we say agency, what we mean is our power, our ability to take action on our own behalf and move our lives in the direction that we desire to go. That ability to do that is available to more people today than ever before in human history. And it is a very modern phenomenon. Up until very recently in human history, you were born into a family and you were going to do what your family did. Like your career was set for you. You were probably going to know who you're going to marry very early on as well. And the truth is that there are certain places, certain cultures where this is all still true. But we're very fortunate that we live in a modern context where we have so much agency. We have so much power. So it becomes about a completely different way to approach the chart. You cannot approach a chart. Okay, yes, you can use the traditional techniques, which is great. We want to learn them. We want to know and have an understanding of our ancestors and how it is that they practiced astrology. We want to utilize that to the best of our ability. But if you are a modern person in a modern context, that interpretation is going to take on different layers and different understandings.
Well, sure. It's the idea that it's set, right? This whole, you know, this fate orientation. This is where I think the Babylonian critique is, you know, which is safely ignored. The two things that traditional astrologers ignore is they ignore Babylonian astrology and they ignore what happened in the 20th century as if it never occurred. Like it's, I've seen this in other places where different branches of astrology or different philosophical camps in astrology that are talking about the same phenomenon are not on speaking terms because, they're not on speaking terms. And some traditional astrology texts are quite openly resentful of modern astrology. Some of them are quite insulting to modern astrology, quite frankly, in the literature. There's only 2 times in my life where I've ever thrown a book across the room, but one of them was written by a traditional astrologer. Yeah. I got so angry reading the book.
I love it. I can just imagine you doing that. So we are not going to do that. We are not going to be, and you are not going to be sharing in a way that would, of course, fit into something that would make somebody want to throw a book across a room. So
I don't consider myself a traditional astrologer, and I'm very upfront about that. I don't consider myself a modern astrologer either. I consider myself a postmodern astrologer. In other words, I'm an astrologer that exists in an epoch where modern astrology happened. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Consciousness is the currency. Wow. Awareness changes one's nature of freedom.
Thank you. Consciousness is alchemy. It changes a thing. It changes the energy. Absolutely. Consciousness is so powerful. Like, I mean, sometimes people ask, about rituals and remedies and things like that around, something that could be challenging in the chart. And I think that, yes, of course, we can incorporate some of that. But the truth is your consciousness changes the way that you experience your chart, the way that you realize your chart. The consciousness itself is the remedy.
Right. Yeah. And this mercurial problem of fretting about transits. Oh no, Mars is going to do this.
Saturn is going to do this.
I'm going to have squares from Saturn. Oh no.
Yeah.
It's grim, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Like we have to be able to understand that the whole reason that we get to understand what we understand through astrology is that so that we can work with it. Ideally, what we want to be able to offer the people who come to us for counsel, the ability to navigate by what influences are coming, harvest from those moments the best of those possibilities to move them in the direction of their dreams. That's what we do, right? And that's what makes astrology so wondrous in a way, be able to have that privilege to affirm a person on that level and to understand them. So having traditional knowledge in your head is having it in your head. Like quite often, I won't use traditional language, even though I'll be drawing on insights from traditional techniques, because it's part of the translation process, that I don't need to tell somebody that such and such a planet is, in its detriment, or I don't need to burden them with the labeling of the system, but I can use the system to inform my approach to understanding the person who is before me.
So I do want to give people an understanding of, like, we're basically going to be doing this through May and just into June as well. And Choose Your Tuition rate is on until the end of April. So people can sign up for as low as just $5 a class. Your first class is Traditional Fundamentals.
Right.
Yeah.
So the traditions.
Go ahead.
The traditions of astrology, the understanding of this whole being born at night versus being born at day and what that could mean and its impact on planetary strength, what the planets look like from this Greek conception of the elements, because it's from Greek philosophy that we get our understanding of earth, air, fire, and water as these 4 fundamental principles in the world.
You'll be exploring and more. In the second class, we're looking at essential dignity. We've talked quite a bit about that so far. It's this idea that certain planets like being in certain signs more than others.
Well, not just signs, like in certain
oh yes,
chunks of chunks of, you know, so it's certain signs, absolutely, but also in terms of certain elements, there's a certain, which is a different kind of benefit within a certain smaller area called a term or bound, which is our units inside of each sign. And then the faces, which are the decans that our people would be familiar with, perhaps from modern astrology, although the traditional school is based in sort of, I believe comes out of out of Egyptian astrology, and is different than the way that moderns divide the 30-degree signs into 10-degree units. So we talk about all of those in terms of the good guys, the so-called benefits, and then we talk a little bit about the detriments and fall positions and what they mean, what the implications of those are. And we'll talk about a particular state of a planet where it has really no dignity at all.
Mm.
It is neither in detriment or fall, and it doesn't have any dignity going for it. This is, you know, a peregrine planet is classically what this is, and we'll discuss what that means and what the implications of that are for the functioning of the planet. So it's a way of, and then we'll look, I'll show how you can total the dignities of a planet, and you can get a sense of how strong it is from its essence, which essential dignity means as related to its position in the zodiac, right? As its position on the zodiac wheel.
And so the third class is planetary fortitudes, stabilities, and joys.
Yeah, and this is really looking at what houses and angularity do in terms of the expression. Well, not the expression, but more the agency of a planet. How much power it has to be able to express itself, and there are various placements. The fortitudes, you know, in terms of angularity versus succeedant houses versus cadent houses.
You'll get
There's
all
that
the
piece.
techniques. People are going to get all these techniques. They're going to get a chance to really play and
Although in terms of understanding, it's understanding planetary strength in houses, basically, is what planetary fortitude, stabilities, and joys, what that really is understanding the traditional way of looking at it from a house's perspective. And we'll also talk about, you know, if you really want to go native, and go whole sign, which is very popular these days. I found I've had even clients request that I look at their chart in whole sign houses because they're so enamored with that particular view of their horoscope.
And it is a very powerful thing. And of course, it's popularized because of a traditional perspective. So that's what draws people to it. Yes.
Yeah, and there's you know, pros and cons to everything. I think like all these things, like, you know, astrology is less about what it is and more about what it points to, you know, the truth which it reveals, rather than getting hung up about what the individual pieces of it may mean. This is not sort of what a lot of astrologers like to sort of assert, a sort of more scientific, objective understanding of astrology, but I just don't, I see it really more as art, as poetry, as a kind of conceptual, symbolic poetry, and to see it as an objective thing is not to understand the social science dimensions of it. It's cultural as well as being, I think,
like,
you know.
Absolutely. Like, I understand what you're saying, because this is a class on traditional techniques. And so the techniques are emphasized. You're going to learn the techniques, but at the same time, you're going to be reminded to bring an astrological perspective, to bring an astrological or symbolic mind, to explore, to learn the techniques, yes, but also to be willing to explore beyond just the technique. That is also a very important layer as part of understanding a chart. And so the fourth class is on temperament.
Yeah, I love temperament.
Yes.
Temperament is one of my favorite things.
Explain it to people what that means.
Well, temperament's out there. Like, it's a non-astrological concept as well, in terms of Other people who don't use astrology talk about the four humors, that sort of the medicalization of the four elements into sort of you know, biological and somewhat psychological attitudes and ways of being similar to the elements, but somehow the way of deriving temperament from a horoscope is different traditionally than summing up the planets in the elements the way we do, or the way modern astrologers typically do, is they look at, you know, what planets are where, or they have some kind of point system for, you know, well, I certainly have of course I have a point system. One has to have a point system, but you total up the planets and the signs, but you also have to know which planets are where, because that's very important information. It's not just enough to look at the raw totals. You have to look at which planets are where in terms of understanding elements from a modern perspective. But the way of deriving temperament is very different because it relies a lot on different factors, and the sun is not really, is calculated differently in traditional astrology in terms of its influence on the temperament and character of a person. So, and the moon is so fundamentally important.
Yes, in a traditional perspective, absolutely, the moon can take on great importance.
Yeah, the moon is so central as a timing element in the ancient world that you know, the moon, as you know, as they say in horary astrology, that's the astrology of questions. The moon rules everything, like in a way, like it's so significant. And in a person's horoscope, I think, well, this is sort of my position, that the modern school of astrology tends to emphasize the sun sign, because that's often the doorway that people get into astrology, is through the sun sign.
Oh,
it's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think that's another thing with traditional perspectives. They like to say, oh, sun sign astrology. But that provides a doorway, but also it makes a very powerful philosophical assertion as well. It asserts an interconnected universe. It asserts our connection to the sky, affirms our connection to the sky, but also there is something that people resonate with. They feel like it reflects or speaks to what is happening within their own lives as well. That doorway.
But you know, you know why that's the case, though, why? Don't you? I mean, wow.
Elitism.
No, the sun, think about what the sun is. Like, on one level, the sun really reflects, kind of, you know, psychologically reflects the dynamic between the ego, you know, which is this tiny point at the center of the symbol, and then the whole circle of totality, which is the person in their completeness. And the sun is about growing in more deeply into that completeness. And because it's a circle, and circles represent sort of that infinity of spirit, the work is never done on your sun sign. It's never over. There's always more to grow into.
Oh, yes. I do believe that the sun is what you become more of over the course of a lifetime.
Well, what you should be, I mean, there should be more, you know, that to grow into yourself, you need that quality, whether you like your sun sign or not, for whatever reason, you know, and there may be astrological reasons in your chart why you have issues with your sun sign. But I agree with you. Most people like their sun sign, but the sun is, you know, the important word here is ego, and the ego tied to this particular sign. Well, you know, you see this light in me, you see that I am such and such a quality and such a quality, or even insulting me by saying that I'm this negative quality or that negative quality. It's like somehow it affirms the light in the person, what they aspire towards, what they want to be more of. So of course it's flattering. Sun signs are very flattering. They show us in our best light.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
The thing about temperament is that it gives you an understanding of a motivational structure beneath the elements. The elements are kind of really what psychologically one is interprets and is motivated to respond in those ways. But quite often the underlying temperament will tell you more about what's sort of in the physical body of it. Like what's the sort of substrate underneath the psychological level. It's sort of semi-conscious as opposed to the more conscious elements, I think, is the difference. And quite often they agree. Like quite often you get the same story, and that confirms, then, as with all things astrological, the more evidence you get for a particular line of thinking about a chart, the more sure you can start to declare with authority that this and this is so, in terms of what you see. So temperament aligning with the elemental breakdown in a chart will tell you something about the consistency. What's really interesting is when there are profound differences. Like, for example, I just had a client who they look at their chart from a modern perspective and they have no fire. Right? I have no fire in my chart. Oh no, of course, there are things to think badly about yourself astrologically in the modern school too. That's the other piece of it, right? Like, it's not unique to modern astrology to say something is bad and, blame it on the stars, blame it on planets behaving badly. But temperament gives us this, when it's different, gives us insight. So this client that had no fire, nevertheless had Scorpio rising, which is ruled by Mars. And not just ruled by Mars, it's also super ruled by Mars, like very super ruled by Mars. The real ruler, the Almutant, the planet that has the most points in Scorpio, is always Mars, always. Yeah. Always Mars. So the fact that this person had no fire didn't mean that they didn't have the choleric quality that corresponds to fire in them. They have something of this because they have the Scorpio energy, the Scorpio influence of it on the ascendant, which is one of the components in temperament is the ascendant, also the moon, also the sun in a different way, and other factors. So we'll look at those, and we'll look at comparing it to what the elemental breakdown of a chart is about in the temperament class.
And the final class that I'm very excited about is on Arabic parts, also called Hellenistic lots. Talk about that. I mean, I know that gets a lot of glitz and glamour and glory. So I'm excited that there's going to be a full.
Does it get glitz and glamour and glory? I mean, I
think so. Part of fortune. People go, what? Part of fortune.
The part of fortune. Well, I mean, the part of fortune is very interesting, but I think one of the things I'm going to stress a lot in that lecture is that, the part of fortune is, you really have to look at the part of spirit, and you have to understand what you're looking at, what you're looking for, and how to calculate the part of spirit based on everything that we've taught in the course so far. When we get to the lots, we're getting it to specific points that are projected through specific points in the chart. So from the ascendant, for example, and this particular point is where the lot falls, and it has to do with a number of phenomenon. There's a part of brothers, there's a part of secret enemies, there's a part of
there's
death,
a part for everything and more.
There's a part for everything, right? There's a part for everything.
Whatever you can imagine, there's a part. Yeah.
You can make up your own, right? That's the thing.
Let's invent one. Let's do it.
Let's invent one. A lot of them have been invented. A lot of them are out there. But the part of spirit and the part of fortune are very useful, and in terms of understanding what they're about. And it's the part of fortune is not about it's not about winning the lottery. Alas, yes. People have hopes that understanding their part of fortune is about winning the lottery. It's something much deeper than that.
Yes, so we'll be exploring that depth of understanding as well.
Yes,
I'm really looking forward to learning from you again, because we just finished Celestial Superpowers, which was fixed stars in astrology, and it was so popular. I mean, I remember right after the first class getting messages from students saying, is Michael Barwick going to be back? Is Michael going to be back? And I tapped you right away. I was like, Michael, you got to come back. People love you. And so it's your teaching style, it's your personality, it's your knowledge, like just all of it. And so I think that learning traditional astrology from you is just going to be such a great, rewarding journey. A lot of people are going to go on. And of course, I'm going to be on that journey as well with other participants, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's definitely going to be fun, and it'll be an adventure for me, for sure. I'm really happy to be able to have this opportunity to present this material, which has been near and dear to my heart for years and years. I've loved this stuff, and you know, I have taken to heart. I mean, I'm critical of traditional astrologers, but that isn't to say that I haven't taken to heart some of their criticisms of the modern school. This is why I think of myself as a postmodern astrologer, because I understand that tradition says X, Y, and Z, but modern astrology asserts something that cannot be unsaid, right? So we're after that. And really, if we look at it, we're all postmodern astrologers because we're all after the modern movement. So what does this mean in terms of where we are now, and how do we contend with these texts, which, you know, have problematical elements to them from a modern perspective, and you know, attitudes that seem quaint and outdated for the 21st century.
Yeah, so it'll be great. It'll be like an update and a new look, but you're learning the traditional techniques and you're having fun and you get practical stuff, but then you also get the philosophical side. So I think we're going to continue to enjoy learning from you. Michael, I'm so excited. Choose Your Tuition Rate is on right now for everybody out there, right to the end of April, as low as just $5 a class. As you can tell, Michael really knows his stuff, and you'll get a really great quality package series of classes, I guess you could say, for an unheard of rate, such a low rate of just $5 a class. So thank you so much, Michael, for agreeing to do it at that rate, and for just being a part of Synchronicity University, being part of my vision. I'm so grateful for that.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, Nadiya. I mean, as I said, bringing this material to an audience that is eager to understand how the ancients saw it, and how they can apply these techniques and what they might be telling us in reference to the modern context in which we live is exciting. It's exciting to be able to empower people with astrology, and having a grounding in the traditional way of looking at things can only make you a sharper astrologer.
Speaking of traditional planets, modern planets, right now we've got Saturn Uranus square happening throughout 2021. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's you know, very much emerging from the vision of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. If you remember back in December,
Yes.
What I call the Star of Hope, the which, you know, manifested in the world as, you know, the vaccine that was going to fix everything, and solve all our woes. Now we're dealing with Saturn confronting Uranus. Saturn's very strong in Aquarius, a sign of its traditional rulership. So it's quite powerful there, but it's squaring a transpersonal planet, Uranus, in the sign of Taurus. And when these two planets collide, there's quite a discordant noise anyway. And the fact that it's by square, I mean, you know, modern astrologers, as enlightened and consciousness centered as they are, when confronted with squares, a square, oh no, a
Squares
square.
get things done. Squares get things done. That's the thing,
Yeah,
though, right? Squares are magical.
They make it happen.
Oh, magical. Yeah. They make it happen.
Well, they're, you know, I have to believe in squares, but for myself personally, but I think that it represents, you know, a collision of principles that are trying to occupy the same space at the same time. And Uranus is very much about shaking things up, and Saturn is about putting things away and under control again. And what we're seeing in the world is, on one hand, you know, these instrumentalities that are vaccinating, which are trying to hold on and contain the virus long enough to vaccinate enough people to prevent subsequent waves and so forth. The sort of Saturnian piece of it that's rolling out this superior science against Uranus, which is in Taurus, which is deviation, mutation, variance that we hear about. And this race in terms of will we be able to vaccinate enough people fast enough to prevent a variant from slipping through these very new vaccines that we've created, and will we need booster shots and so on and so forth. It's topsy-turvy time. That's what.
And it's also the resistance to it, and it's also this idea that, you know, the herd immunity is going to kick in before the year is over, but then if there are variants, is it going to, like, so there's that layer to it, but then there's also the social layer as well, where people have mixed feelings or ambivalence, and some have enthusiasm, some maybe not as much. The control, the government control right now. Yes, I've lived in Mexico for over 8 years, which is great, but Canada is basically closed. Effectively, they have shut their border by imposing very expensive, and I don't like to think of things that, look, Uranus and Taurus right now, I don't like to think of things in that context, what's cheap or what's expensive, but yeah, they've imposed this sort of deterrent policy so that it is not necessarily easy to just go back home, to go back to Canada.
Yeah.
And so, and that's just an example of one government doing that. Like, Canada is thought to be a particularly progressive government, or we pride ourselves on human rights. And then there's that layer of what's happening right now, and how that's interpreted can be, you know, just remarkably different depending on who you ask. And I think that's part of it as well. Like, what's happening, why it's happening, you know, what does it mean? What is the extent of power? Where is power going too far? All of this is part of the tension that we are seeing, the square and how it's playing out.
Saturn is very strong in Aquarius. And so the executive powers of the state to handle an emergency situation, a pandemic, is being run by the experts that specialize and have that expertise in terms of understanding the emerging science of the virus and what steps need to be taken to prevent a public health catastrophe. That's that's the Saturnian side. The Uranian side is, you know, is much more sort of reactionary in terms of this. What about my stuff? What about what I own? What about what's important to me and what I value? And why can't I do the things that I want to do? And the cry for freedom in the face of these very oppressive lockdowns and restrictions that are necessary to prevent the virus, and yet are having such profoundly distressing effects on so many members of the population from a mental health perspective. And, you know, others have, people raise the concern about that what's being asked is too great a burden to bear for the members of society. And so, you know, we get protests. In Toronto, I've had a group go right up my street with a loudspeaker protesting the lockdown. There's a house not very far from me where, you know, there's a sign in the window protesting, you know, what's been going on in Toronto. So, I mean, the ambivalence about and concerns about the restrictions of the state are out there. It's in the, and that's very much the Iranian drive for freedom and independence. And somehow these two things are colliding. That's the square, in that they are both trying to occupy the same space at the same time. The state cannot lock down things, can lock down things and restrict people's rights or access or participation in economic things, Taurus, you know, traditionally associated with wealth. We want to think about Taurus, although really Taurus is about value. But anyway, the point is that this collision between that need to lock down and that need for freedom is creating a very topsy-turvy situation culturally and politically. And then we're seeing sort of the hard science versus the virus mutating, which is also Saturn versus Uranus. And we're also seeing, the unraveling of people in terms of dealing with mental health issues, which is also Saturn and Uranus, a planet traditionally associated with genius / madness with Uranus. You never know how it's going to go.
Yeah.
So I think that this year, the three passes of this are very much related to the topsy-turvy battle between these two principles, and it'll take the year to sort it out, in terms of how it's going to go.
Universe, help us, because we have like these exact squares coming up. I mean, look, we figure it out. That's the thing. We as humanity, we're pretty ingenious. We find ways to use these different aspects or to tap into them. They find expression in one way or another. But yes, we've got another square coming up in mid-June. We just had one in mid-February. Now we have one in mid-June. Mid-February was when all the flights between direct flights, Canada and Mexico direct flights got canceled till the end of April. So now I don't know when there's going to be direct flights back home to Canada. That's fine. That's fine. But mid-June, we've got another square coming up. Christmas Eve, we've got another square coming up. So it'll be interesting to see like how long. I can understand people feeling tired. The frustration, the square is the frustration. And I understand that, The Aquarius
I think
has that two sides. It has the side that respects the science and wants things to go well for everybody, but then also has that side where I can understand why there is that undercurrent of frustration there, or that sense of people wanting to own whatever freedom that they can right now.
Well, I mean, understandably, it's a huge impact socially. I mean, one of that it's and we're social creatures. We're built on our relatedness to other folks, and not being able to participate in that important dimension of ourselves in the many different ways we interact with others is deleterious to our mental health. I mean, all of us. So the challenge for everyone with Saturn Uranus is finding a way to deal with it internally. I mean, Jung said that if there's something wrong in the collective, that means there's something wrong in you, and that you need to address it internally in terms of where the issue is for you. So, Saturn Uranus is really about, setting your own individual unique discipline, and about changing the structure and the routine, and innovating around ways in which you can support your existence. Your life is different. One way is saying that it's the new normal, right? That people talk about the new normal, the new normal, the new normal, or the new normal, or what the new normal will be after everyone's vaccinated, if we get there.
Right.
But that is the Saturn Uranus thing, is to be put together this sense of freedom and structure combined in an individualistic form that you can put your time, Saturn, into. That's, I think a lot of people are doing this in terms of activating hobbies, activating interests, baking, and, so like there's a lot of things are happening for people in terms of them finding creative outlets and creative ways of running their routines to be able to manage under these circumstances. But for everyone, there's no question we're all managing, and we're all dealing with the cutoff, the great lockdown, the containment, and the restrictions, and the masks, and the hand washing, and the lack of the casual, free way we used to interact. I don't know if you have this problem, but I've been, I watch TV shows sometimes, and I think, those people are interacting without masks. They're like, it's like, they're so close together. It's kind of shocking to see, life as it was normally, not so long ago now, because it has been a year, right? I guess. So we just have to be, again, the Saturnian virtue of patience. We have to find new patience to be able to manage. And that, I think, is calling on us to find creative ways to use what freedom we have to build something concrete for ourselves. And that's, that's an individual way of approaching the problem.
But there's also something very honest about this, right? Like I think about with my own life, like how much I got, I could be busy, so I didn't have to look at what I was really feeling around a given matter. And what I've noticed is like people are being honest and embracing their honesty in their own unique ways. For example, lots of people are having babies, right? Where they weren't before. They're starting to have babies. Lots of people are shacking up or getting married. Lots of people breaking up, right? It's because you have to look at your life because you don't have any other choice. There's nowhere to go, right?
Yep.
Not like with me, I love taking off. I love taking a plane. Like planes are my happy space, my happy place. I love taking like long plane rides, right, to other continents. None of that is happening right now. And so it's like, okay, sit with you. What do you really feel? Really having to look at dynamics of interactions, of relationships, of the people around you, of the way that you're thinking about things, right? What really needs to be healed within us? All of that, there's something very honest about that that's coming forward. It's like we no longer have the distraction to make excuses. Distractions allow us to make the excuses that we just don't have the space for anymore. And I think that is part of what makes this difficult too for a lot of people.
Well, we're being thrown back on our sort of individual selves in a way that is demanding, and the drive, the combination of taking this what bit of freedom we have and creatively building it into the structure of our lives. That's work, Saturn. Right? If you polarize to Uranus and go, everything I have that's important to me is being taken away from me. If that's, well, that may be true, but then you have to find new things to value, or new things that you can fit into the structure of your life that can enrich it on a personal level. But it's work, it's Saturn to do this. It's easy to sort of, well, maybe not easy, but protesting can seem attractive as a way of sort of dealing with the situation, but
people have a right to protest. Let me just say,
absolutely, they do.
And I don't want to. I think we want to honor the fact that different people have different experiences and different perspectives.
Sure.
And we are very blessed that we live in spaces and places where we take it for granted that we have a right to protest. So people have a right to do that.
Absolutely, they do. And absolutely do. But on top of that, I would also encourage people to find creative outlets for their individuality in the face of being cut off from the social world in the way that we're accustomed to living in. And that is, the part of that is this mediated world of Zoom, living in, interacting with the world virtually. Some of it is that. Some of it is, streaming appropriate content in terms of streaming content that is enriching and affirming and consciousness building for you in terms of your approach to life. It's like the big question is, what are you streaming, right? Like, what are you binge watching, right? But I think that's legitimately an important thing in terms of I believe in the power of art to expand and uplift consciousness. So, people should find ways of exploring those dimensions of life. These are the technical ways that one can sort of deal with it, like many of us are, to sort of get through what is this, what the President of the United States has described as a war. It's a global crisis, no kidding. It's a war, and it has casualties and it has impacts, and we're still in it, even though things are looking that eventually they're going to normalize.
When do you
and we
think
just have to hang
normalization?
on.
When do you think normalization is going to happen?
Well, I think very much this Saturn Uranus square is, you know, is part of coming to terms with the present situation and containing it. Ultimately, I think Saturn has the upper hand because of its dignity, to use the word from the course. Its rulership of Aquarius, traditional rulership of Aquarius, makes it very strong there. So I think that ultimately Saturn will succeed in containing the problem. How effective that will be and how complete that will be, I think the jury's still out. I mean, they're still talking about the inequities in terms of who's getting vaccine and, you know, and so forth. Guess what? Richer countries are going to get access before poorer ones are. Surprise, surprise. You know, these kinds of inequities and injustices we see, you know, replicated in the face of a global pandemic. I think that is also going to have impacts for an impetus to change the current structure of things to make it more equitable and more just. Certainly, there are a lot of voices of people who feel that they've been left out of the prosperity that has been generated. Workers who have not seen salaries rise in accordance with their productivity, with the cost of living, cost of housing. So these kinds of concerns, these kinds of inequities and injustices are also being crystallized by Saturn, or being brought to the surface, or being vocalized. And so I think we're going to see actions being taken about those things in terms of actually, you know, institutionalizing greater freedoms for people in the long term. With Saturn, it's always, you have to think about, it's the long term. It's, you know, we have to think about what's ahead. Particularly Saturn in Aquarius, it has that future orientation. What is the structure ahead that we want to go to? What is the plan in terms of where we want to be and how we want to relate to each other in a humanitarian and human context? So I think it's going to be the year, really. I think things will normalize in some places sooner than that, and other places maybe not even by the end of it. But I think that the major struggle of this, you know, chaos versus order, is the way I've described it, will run its course with this aspect, you know, ending at the end of the year.
Yeah. So this is part of the characteristic of 2021. And like energy likes to do, it does change, it does transition, it does transform, and we'll move on to the next thing. How do you see Pluto not Pluto, sorry. I mean, yes, Pluto in Aquarius, that's a whole other thing. But Jupiter in Pisces, I'm thinking about Jupiter in Pisces. You know, I'm thinking like all this hope and stuff that's happening right now with Jupiter in Aquarius. I'm thinking Jupiter in Pisces, we're going to get that little bit of a dip in the spring. Yeah. And coming up very soon. And then next year is going to be characterized by Jupiter in Pisces. And Pisces, of course, is medicine, it's hospitals, it's an energy. And Jupiter really likes being in its home sign of Pisces. And so it should be really interesting to see, I think, perhaps some resolution, greater resolutions, these pockets of resolutions happening with Jupiter in Pisces.
Well, Jupiter in Pisces is really, it really should be good news. Should bring some clarity, should bring some truth to that area that badly needs it. You know, one of my arguments, you know, in terms of Neptune ruling Pisces, for example, because Neptune's in the sign, is that Neptune isn't really behaving very well in Pisces. This is not a time in which there's an agreed upon spiritual truth that unifies all humanity out there. That's not what we have.
That is Neptune being strong, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neptune being
you would think.
I think confusion and mysticism and all of that. Yeah, it's
well, and conspiracy theories. It's
yeah.
I mean,
I think conspiracy theories, but conspiracy theories can be, yes, they can be very Neptunian, absolutely. but they're also kind of Aquarian as well, very Aquarian, because Aquarius is about making connections where before there were not, and maybe where there are not making connections. So in some ways, I think the energy of Aquarius can fit that paradigm of conspiracy theories, or the mindset that even allows conspiracy theories to come forward. Whereas in
I suppose
it's the delusional
Aquarius could, yeah, well, that's the thinking, you know, delusion. It's like if you get Aquarius and Pisces together, you can get quite a delusional creature, right? In terms of, you know, those two signs.
Not necessarily. You can also get an imaginative, brilliant, articulate, genius energy. But
well, no, but I mean, but what I mean by that is, if you look at, say, if you look at an author like Liz Green in terms of what she has to say about Pisces and Scorpio and Aquarius, is that they have to sort of be more than just personally involved with the classical planets, that they need this other dimension to what they're doing. Pisces need a Neptunian dimension, Aquarians need a Uranian one, and Scorpios need a Plutonian one, as part of a necessary dimension of their lives, or otherwise they're not fully who they are. I don't know if this is true. I do know that affinity to the signs is real. I mean, there's no question. There's a reason why, you know, astrologers looked at Neptune and applied it to Pisces, and Aquarius to Uranus, and so forth, Pluto to Scorpio. But there's even good evidence, at least I've seen good evidence, that transits, which shouldn't work, but it does. Every traditional astrologer will burn me in effigy, but transits to outer planets have impact, and not just impact in terms of the houses where they are, but more concretely, often the houses that they have affinity with. Notice I say affinity with. So the house where Aquarius is, you have a transit to your natal Uranus, there could be, or quite possibly, a Uranian thing happen where in the house where Aquarius is on the cusp, or where Aquarius is that particular house. I've seen examples of this. So there is something to this modern notion, but it's not the same as rulership. Rulership should be, in terms of from a traditional perspective, is this idea that the planet behaves well. It's balanced, it's not extreme. It knows how to get along. It knows how to work the system. This can be quite sinister in some examples, as we'll see in the course, of people with very high dignity that knew how to work the system.
Oh, yes.
Very sinister examples.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that traditional astrology gives us a certain lens by which to look at things, but we need to be able to ground that in some kind of context relative to the world in which we live. That isn't to say that I'm not critical of modern astrology and some of the choices that have been made in terms of its development by the Theosophists onward in the early part of the 20th century. I think they threw out a lot of stuff in their urge to drag astrology out of the Dark Ages and change things. And I don't think they necessarily improved stuff, but I can understand why they went the way they went. I think it's important from where we are now to coming from a place of modern understanding in a 21st century world, looking at our charts and seeing, okay, what does this tell us about the strength of planets? What does this tell us about our makeup on this biological level from a temperament perspective? What does this say about, you know, what is the part of fortune? What is fortune? You know, and what does it mean to have it somewhere? And what is the part of spirit, and what's that about? And other parts of our other lots.
And lots of exciting things that we are going
lots and lots. Like it's
lots and lots of lots, right? We're going to have so much to talk about your course. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I was so happy to talk to you. People don't realize this right now. You're watching at home, but we have actually been talking for about 2 hours. I'm going to edit it down, but just really remember, Michael's class, Choose Your Tuition Rate, is on right now at synchronicityuniversity.com. And we're going to have a lot of fun over the course of May and into June, talking about traditional astrology techniques for the modern 21st century astrologer. Yes.
So exciting. So exciting. I'm so honored to be doing this. I can't believe that it's happening, that I'm delivering this material in a way that I would have loved to have received an orientation to how to even just approach this stuff, how to be able to have some orientation to what it is, why it's important, how it can be used, and how it can be critiqued. I think that everything is open to critique in astrology. Modern astrology is open to critique. Traditional astrology is open to critique. All the traditions are open to critique and criticism. And the idea that one particular school or one particular orientation or one particular perspective is the only way of looking at something is just simply short-sighted. I think that it's having multiple lenses to approach your understanding of the chart can only make you more powerful. And understanding the symbols in this very deep sort of traditional way, it's like you get at kind of the unconscious of the symbols themselves in terms of their roots, can help you in terms of it can help you.
The unconscious of the symbol, the root. Oh, it's so exciting.
Well, I mean, that's what it is. Like, this
is what it is to be an astrologer, right? This is the thing that gets us all riled up and gets us all excited. Well,
we nerd out on it. I mean, we do. It's the foundation of. It's the foundation of the tradition we've inherited, and we should understand it. It's important to understand it.
Absolutely,
it's important, and understanding it will help you to be able to reason astrologically and imagine astrologically, which is so important in terms of crafting delineations and refining one's skill as an astrologer.
Michael, I love you. I send you big hugs. I send you big love. I know we had planned to talk about American Gods because we love that show so much, but we'll have to save that conversation for another day. But it is just an amazing time to be talking to you, to be hanging out with you, to be learning from you, to have you at synchronicityuniversity.com, all of it. Just a lovely, lovely moment for both of us in our lives, right?
Right. We'll have to do a talk about astrology and popular culture or something.
We'll have to do another video very soon where we actually get to talk about American Gods because we both love that show so much. Yes.
We both love the show. It's true.
Thank you again, Michael. And thank you everybody for watching right to the end. If you're still here, you watched to the end and I appreciate it so much. Remember, synchronicityuniversity.com, michaelbarwick.com, nadiyashah.com, all of that. And thank you. It'll be
all right.
Yes, it'll be a great class. It'll be a great class. Enjoy.